to the level that their life, once they got into campus.
Well, we also live much different lives than we do. Like, we joke around on the podcast about how we don't have any lives, whatever. We sit at home. We are homebodies because of what we've been, what we do with the site and everything like that. But we chose that life. We got into that life when we were younger. That's what we did. For them, these are guys that were heroes of their high school. They were guys that had a ton of friends. They used to go and hang out probably at parties on Friday nights and everything like that. Now you're going to campus where, first of all, especially for the freshmen, I don't care if you're a college athlete or not. It is really difficult being a freshman at college where you don't have your family to lean on. You don't really, you're the only connection that you have with your family is via telephone, via Zoom, whatever. And now, not only are you not able to do that, well, you can't really be that close to your teammates either because we don't want, you guys spreading COVID if one of you guys ends up turning up with COVID. So we're going to need you guys to kind of spread out. And I think that was one of the biggest things. Maybe it's just me. I don't think this freshman class seemed to be as tight as some of the other freshmen. Like this, now again, you're not going to find many classes like this because as we've said with him in the NBA, Theo Pinson is the ultimate glue guy. Theo could be friends with anybody. But you look at some of those classes, even to a certain extent, Kobe White, when he came in that class, those guys were a much more tight-knit group than the group that was there this year because they just didn't get the opportunities to do that.
And I've mentioned it, and I've had Adam Lucas and Jones Angel and Brendan Marks on this podcast, and they've mentioned it.
Humble brag, by the way, just listing all those names off there.
Not having your normal offseason where you're getting all the former pros back on campus.
Yep.
Not having those preseason scrimmages where even though you're going to get better at basketball, Roy Williams makes it an event no matter where you go, you do something as a team.
Even late night, like when you go out,
Roy,
you get to dance with you. Like you realize like the dance routines. Like we laugh at them, we think some of them are like hilarious because some of the guys can't dance or whatever. They literally spend time learning those routines and everything.
Yeah.
And see, that's the thing. Everybody says, oh well, they didn't have the practices, they didn't have the scrimmages. They didn't have the experiences of being a team that you normally get.
You got to go to Maui, but it was relocated in Asheville. Asheville ain't Maui, folks.
Yeah, not quite as sexy to see the steam rising over the Great Smoky Mountains as opposed to the sun rising over the beaches of
And then you look at
Honolulu.
the road trips. The road trips for Carolina basketball, you go to win the game, but Dean Smith made it a precedent early on when he took over this program. You're going to fly first class. You're going to eat at the great restaurants. All that stuff where it was almost like an event on its own. You're going on the road, but you're going to have a lot of fun, and that's where you bond. You didn't get to bond this year. You didn't get to hang out with your team. You got to hang out in your hotel room.
Am I the only one that normally you see Roy Williams at least once a year sort of laugh and joke around with his players and everything like that because there's just certain games where he's having a really fun time with a group of guys that he has a great connection with. This year, I never really saw that. And again, there's not a whole lot that you can do about that because you were expected to be more hands-off this year
there was
than in previous years.
Disconnect that you couldn't override.
Right. Yep.
And I do think for this program, the way that the head coach wants it to run, that disconnect hurt them more, just as much on the court and as just as much off the court. So with that, we're going to do a mini state of the program. I've been saying really since the end of the season, we're going to fully break this program down top to bottom, and we're going to do that later in the offseason. But this move, with a lot of the rumors around it, doesn't leave us a choice but to go ahead and at least address it right now. Follow with me here, because when I say this, you're gonna look at me and y'all gonna hear this and raise your eyebrow. What the heck's he talking about?
You're gonna look at your phone.
With what's potentially happening, this feels a lot like the end of the Matt Doherty era, and by that I mean this. Before Matt Doherty was eventually let go, and they brought in Roy Williams, Raymond Felton, Sean May, Jawad Williams, all those guys that were a really big part of the reason why you won that 2005 national championship, had threatened to either leave, and transferring back then wasn't a big deal, but those guys weren't NBA ready, so they were going to have to transfer, or go straight to the NBA. The program at the time thought was best was to get rid of Matt Doherty. You bring in Roy Williams, he reestablishes the family. All is well in Chapel Hill, and we go on and we've had this great run. Not saying that Bubba Cunningham is going to fire Roy Williams. I don't believe Bubba believe Bubba to be that.
Can't do it.
That kind of guy.
You can't do it. There's just no way that you can actually fire him. It's just that simple.
But after Roy Williams kissed the court after you beat Duke, there was a lot of talk about this is it. That was his way of saying goodbye. The next day he comes out, gives a $3 million gift to the university. We all know Roy Williams isn't the type of guy that he doesn't want a parade when he's done. And as much as it's worn on the players, he mentioned it a lot in that press conference against Wisconsin, that COVID really, what it did to him, even though he didn't contract it or whatever, the things around it got to him. Is there a potential scenario where Roy Williams knows in his head and his heart he's retiring, and he's telling these kids now so they can get a jump start on doing what's best for them moving forward?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest. Like, I think that's one of the scenarios that is possible. Do I think it's the most likely scenario? No, I don't think that. I still think that as of right now, you are moving ahead with the assumption that Roy Williams is going to be your head coach. But I mean, yeah, I think it has to be in the minds of people when you see the kissing of the court, when you see the gift. And I mean, look, maybe that's just something where, he wanted to get back to the university, but that's a pretty significant gift.
$3 million's a lot of millions.
So that you think that, that's a lot of coin right there. I mean, and the press conference that he did after the Wisconsin game, I think was also kind of telling because, like, look, man, I understand that it was a rough year. He was pretty emotional for a press conference after a game in the first round where you got beat by 17.
Yeah,
or no, excuse me,
23.
I get it mixed up. Yeah. I mean,
I think.
I don't know, man.
I think there's some degree to that, but I also just know it don't matter when this team loses, how this team loses. He's as emotional a head coach when their season comes to an end as you're going to find in college basketball. I think what makes all of this more compelling and really gets you start thinking is when you go back to the press conference, either it was before the Duke game at home, I believe, or it may have been heading into the ACC tournament where he went on a monologue talking about Wes Miller. And maybe that was his way of signaling to Carolina, to the family, to the fans, because he's every Tar Heel fan's top choice to take over this program. And there's a pretty good indication as to why. You look at what he's done at Greensboro. The program, he's built that program from nothing to they're usually the favorite to win the SoCon. They played Florida State extremely tough in the NCAA tournament. They played Gonzaga extremely tough in the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago. He's a growing star at the college level of coaching in basketball. And so I think that factors into this as well. I think the biggest problem is this.
Well, really quickly with the Wes Miller thing, I said this when we brought this up a couple weeks ago. Do remember that this was a question that was asked by somebody about Wes. This was not.
Yeah, but you could have answered that question with one or two sentences.
But that's also not how Roy is. Like, Roy's a guy that takes a lot of pride in talking about his former players and really trying to help them out. I mean,
he didn't do that after they beat Gerard Haas in Stanford or King Rice in Monmouth, who King Rice entered the press conference crying.
Well, to be fair, I don't think that he had quite the connection with King Rice that he did with Wes Miller. Wes Miller was a guy that
but he recruited
and
Gerard
Gerard Haas was a guy that was on his staff. Look,
and played for him at Kansas and is one of his top 5 dudes of all time.
Maybe, but I don't know. Like I feel like
he could have answered that question with 1 or 2 sentences, and he pretty much, if you go back and listen to it, you could make the argument he was advocating for him to be the coach here. And look,
maybe it is. Look, he's going to be able to pretty much handpick the next head coach.
I think that's part of it. That decision to be made is not Bubba Cunningham's. That's Roy Williams's. The only thing Bubba Cunningham should determine is the money and the contract. Outside of that, Roy Williams is going to walk in the room and say, "This is our head basketball coach. Y'all figure out the money. I'm out the door." The issue is
it's not as simple as that. It is going to be similar to when Dean tried to pick him. But you still
only if he tells you no.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you do have to have, like, he is the one, but he is going to be the one that is going to suggest who the next head coach will be, and will more than likely be the guy that will make the phone call. Very similar to, if you've read Roy Williams' book, very similar to what happened when Dean approached him the first time and when Dean approached him the second time.
And so the biggest issue with this, and I'm going to sit here and say that if I had to bet he'll be the head coach when this season starts next year, the biggest issue is this. If he's not retiring, and this isn't him putting his players first to go do what's best for them, and he's just going to kind of retire under the rug, then what's wrong? Because this isn't supposed to happen at a program where a coach has been established for 17 years, has went to 4 Final Fours, and won 3 national championships, has the floor named after him, and is as decorated a coach as there is in the country.
Right. Well, there's one of 2 things that could happen. One, like you mentioned, this could pretty much push him to the brink of saying, we're not getting one and done guys. It's just, it's not going to happen. At the max, you're bringing in one guy that is considering himself to be a one and done prospect.
You know, a lot of Tar Heel fans are wanting him to reevaluate his philosophy. This may force him to reevaluate his philosophy from top to bottom as how he wants to run the program.
And the other thing is, to be honest with you, I think another thing that this could lead to, there could be a hard look at the current coaching staff. Because I'm going to be honest with you. You would think that there would be some sort of attachment between these coaches and kids that would make it difficult for these guys to leave.
I'm going to tell you, and I mentioned this
before we started recording.
I think there's issues with the staff in terms of they're not developing players to the level at which you would expect at Carolina. I think they've got a really, really good coaching staff. You've got veteran coaches, but you've also put some guys in positions that maybe they weren't ready for. Brad Frederick, Sean May.
Well, part of that you can't help because you lost Gerard Haas, who took a head coaching job. You lost C.B. McGrath, who took a head coaching job.
That's the biggest loss that this coaching staff, and I think, and I'll be the first one to sit here and admit, I didn't think that it's a much bigger loss than what I thought it was at the time. All congrats to him at the time to go and becoming a head coach. Didn't work out there. He's back doing stuff with Carolina, and maybe that's him getting there's a very good chance that he'll be on the coaching staff next year because I don't see him being back at Carolina if he's not going to be involved back on the basketball side of things and the coaching aspect. You talked about the players not having that relationship. If you go back and listen to a lot of the former players, C.B. McGrath was that guy. And I think we all thought that was going to be Hubert Davis's role, was he was going to be able the guy to build the relationships. Not saying that he's not. But I think C.B. McGrath, because he's been doing it longer, is just better at building those relationships while coaching these kids really, really hard. It was coming from a place of that he wants them to be a better player, a better person, a place of love, not some tough guy, act or anything like that. So I think that's some of it, where he has to reevaluate his staff from top to bottom, because I think this offseason will force him to reevaluate his program top to bottom. If you're going to lose the type of guys that you're going to lose, but this is unprecedented, as you mentioned. This
Right.
losing guys like this is only supposed to happen if a coach is getting fired and a new guy's coming in. Well, Roy